Hi all, this video will be covering the complete upgrade guide and the process of upgrading your current story framework projects, which should be in version 2.0, to include and implement all of the new content, features, and changes inside version 3.0 of story framework. Feel free to jump around to different parts in this tutorial. There's no specific order, though the more major changes and new content will be in the first few parts of this tutorial. So I would highly recommend watching it from the start. Okay, let's jump right into it. Firstly, we're going to start with integrating the new task system. So in the description of this video, you will find a few pastebin links to different sections of code that we will be pasting into our graphs. As this process goes on, this will be utilized throughout different sections and different content that gets. So like stated before, let's start with the task system. So let's go into our content browser, the story framework folder. We're going to go to core, blueprints, components, core again, and we're looking for the inventory manager. This will all be integrated into the inventory manager. So with this open, let's open our content browser again. Let's go back to core, blueprints, structures, and we're going to set up a new structure. So let's right click, let's go to blueprints, structure. We're going to call this task info underscore s as its suffix is structure. Let's open this up. Let's go to the structure tab. We're going to change the first variable to a text. And we're going to call this task header. This will serve as the task's title or the task's name. This gets utilized often to reference specific tasks in the task queue, which we'll get to eventually. And we're going to add another variable. We're going to call this task description. This is pretty self-explanatory. This is just the task's description that gets displayed in the pop-up. We're going to add another variable. We're going to call this task image. This image is used in the background of the task pop-up to sort of visually communicate to the player what that specific task is for, or what that specific task is supposed to do, or what the player is supposed to do for that task. So we're going to change this variable to a slate brush. Then finally, for the last variable, we're going to call this task timer. So this is if your task, or if you'd like your task to utilize a timer, this will be used to give your tasks a specific time limit. So let's save this. Then back into the inventory manager, we need to set up a few variables. So first one will be called task queue. This will be changed to our new structure that we just created, this variable. And we're going to make it an array. Then we're going to set up another task info array. This will be called completed tasks. Then we're going to create another new variable, call this task timer handle. This is to manage the timer that is utilized. So we're going to change this to timer handle. This is just a regular single variable. This isn't an array. Another new variable, we're going to call it task timer. This will be a float. Then timer update frequency. We can click on this little eye icon to expose this variable. This means we can edit this variable from anywhere that this component is implemented. So for instance, inside the player controller, we can click on this component in the components hierarchy and change this value. For now, we're going to change this value to 1. And I'll explain what this does in a second. Then we're going to set up another float variable. We're going to call this task queue interval. This will also be exposed. And we're going to also set this to 1. And finally, for the last one, we're going to create a new variable called task info pop-up ref or reference. And we're going to change this variable to pop-up master widget. So the tasks utilize the pop-up master widget class. So let's hit compile and save. Now in the description, you'll find a pastebin link that is named SF3 task functionality. So we're going to copy the pastebin link and open this up inside of our browser. Once this is open up inside our browser, we can just click anywhere inside this window, hit Control A and Control C to copy. And then we're going to paste it just below under systems root. You can drag this down a bit, expand this comment, and let's just quickly fix up these collapse graph names. Now we're going to open up each of these different sections and we're going to slowly work through all the bad references. So for instance, the task timer that is connected here, we just need to reconnect our new task timer. Over here by the fail current task function, we just need to call this again and straighten it up, reconnect it. Same thing with the initiate task timer. Now we're going to hit compile and quickly head over here. That's all good. Okay, now we're going to set up the new event dispatchers for the tasks. So these event dispatchers can be utilized to execute more custom functionality when a task is completed or a task is failed, a specific task. And we specify this task by its header. So we can reconnect this task header text variable into the pin and create a new event dispatcher. We'll call this on task completed. We head up into the details panel and give it a new parameter. We're going to call this parameter task header and we're going to change it to a text. Same thing with on task failed event dispatcher. New parameter, task header. Now we can hit compile. If we go up to file, we can hit refresh all nodes, which should update these two calls on the event dispatchers. Now we're going to head over to our functions section and we're going to add a new function. We're going to call this get current task. We're going to select our task queue array variable and get a reference to it. Off of this, we're going to search get and get a copy of the first index in the array. This is the first index in the task queue is essentially what we would refer to as the active task. So let's add a new output into this array. We can drag this pin into the return node to create a new pin on the return node. We can delete the previous pin. And we'll call this task. We'll call this task current task info. Let's compile, refresh all nodes again. Now select the return node on this function and we want to change this function to be a pure function. Now anywhere that this get current task function is referenced, we just need to reconnect up the task info structure pin. So I'm going to do that now. Now in the description again, we're looking for the SF3 task custom function A. Exact same process as before. We're going to simply copy the link and paste it into a new tab. Control A, Control C. And then we can just simply paste this anywhere in this graph. It'll create the function for us. Now we just need to reconnect the task header pin that went bad. Hit compile. We can make sure that this function is being used correctly, which it's not. So what might fix it is refreshing this graph again. There we go. Now, as far as I'm aware, the rest of these issues are relating to the pop-up widget, which we're going to dive into now. Before we jump into the pop-up widget part of the tasks, I'd just like to sort out some things with our variables. So let's give all the new task variables we just created a category. So we'll give it a tasks category and just add all these tasks, or add all the task variables into the tasks category. Now I want to briefly explain these different variables and what they're used for. So the task queue is very simply the queue of tasks that gets added. The completed tasks are tasks that get successfully completed. They get added to their own array. Task timer handle is used for the task timer. Same thing for the task timer float. Timer update frequency is essentially used to determine how often the timer updates. So for instance, we have this set to 1, so every 1 second this timer will count down. If the set is set to 0.1, then every 0.1 seconds the timer will reduce. The task queue interval is used to determine how long the task pop-up will wait before displaying the next task inside the queue. Okay, let's jump into the pop-up widget side of the tasks. So let's open up the content browser again. I'm going to go to Story Framework, Core, User Interface, Widgets. I'm going to look for the pop-up master widget. Now in the description again, we're going to go down and look for the SF3 task pop-up elements. Same thing as before, copy the link, paste it into a new tab, Control A, Control C. Now we can click on our canvas panel element and just hit paste. So this should have pasted the task info pop-up widget into our widget viewport. We can hit compile and save again. We can hop over into the graph and we're going to start setting up the functionality for the pop-up. But first, inside the hide all pop-ups and display target macro, we need to add our new task info pop-up that we just pasted in. We need to add it to the collection of widgets that get set to collapsed. Their visibility gets set to collapsed when we show and hide new pop-ups. Now back into the event graph. Again, down into the description, we're looking for SF3 task pop-up events this time. Paste it into a new tab. Control A, Control C. And we're just going to paste this in here. If it prompts you to fix the self-context function references, just select the option to do nothing. We'll fix this ourselves. Now we can just drag this in under everything else. And all the variables that are being set, we need to now create. So on each one, we can just right click and choose the create variable. So we're going to do this for all of them. The task pop-up animation we're not going to create because we're going to set this up in a second. Now we need to reconnect these pins that went bad. So task header into task info header, description, task image, and task timer. You can just neaten this up a little bit. Same thing with the get current task function from the inventory manager. Going to compile, we're going to get a few errors. It's perfectly fine. We're going to try and refresh these nodes to fix up this function call that was bad. Now we're going to set up the animation for this task info pop-up. So now we're going to set up the animation. So let's open up our animations tab. We're going to click on new animation. We're going to call this task pop-up. With our task element selected in our hierarchy, we can select this task pop-up again and add a new track for the task info pop-up. Then add a new track to the task info pop-up for transform. Let's zoom in a little by holding Control and scrolling up. Then dropping down the transform and the translation, we're looking for the X value. We're going to adjust this to something like 600 roughly. then if you're not seeing your timeline here, it might be because it's sort of resized itself. We can just drag this out to about 0.20 seconds. That should be good. Then we can drag to the end of our timeline in our animation, and we can set this back to 0. So now we just have our widget simply swiping in. We're going to add another track for render opacity. Starts at 0. At about 0.10, it fades into 1. We can actually move this to 0.15, so now it sort of fades in. Compile and save. These should have updated, these task pop-up references. We need to fix this task header pin that went bad. We just need to reconnect it up. Hit compile and save. Now we can start binding these new variables to the different elements. So let's do task image. The brush value will be set to task brush. The next queue task we will set up ourselves with a function. Same thing with the timer text. Description will be the task info description variable. Same thing with the header, the task info header. Then the task state bar, the color and opacity needs to be binded to task state color. Once that's done, we can hit compile and save again. Now we need to set up some new functions for the different texts. So let's find our task timer or timer text. Under the bindings, we're going to create a new binding. I'm just going to simply call this get timer text. So let's do a get SF inventory manager reference. Off of this, we're going to search for task timer, get task timer. Off of this again, we're going to convert it to a integer using the truncate function. Now we're going to right click without dragging off any pins. So we're going to search for select string. Now we're going to convert the task timer into a. So we're converting the float to a string. And same thing with the integer. I'll explain why we're doing this now in a sec. Then again, off of the inventory manager, we're going to search for timer update frequency. Off of this, we're going to do a less than. And we're checking if it's less than 1 or less than a 1 second update frequency. So to explain this briefly, what this is doing is if our timer update frequency is less than 1, if it's a decimal value, it will use the raw task timer value from the float. If it's higher than 1, it would fall under a integer value. Then we essentially just use the integer value of the task timer rather. This just sort of neatens up the timer a little bit. Now off of this select string, we're going to do an append in B. We're going to type space sec for seconds, and then we can simply plug this return value into the return node text to convert the string to a text. So compile and save. Now with our task info pop-up overlay selected, we need to create a new visibility binding. This is to make sure that the task is hidden or shown at correct times during gameplay. For instance, if a sequence is playing or the character is interacting with an NPC, we want to hide our task. So let's do a get SF sequence manager reference. Off of this, we're going to do a get current sequence. Then off of that, we're going to do an is valid. So we're checking if the current sequence is valid, if it exists. Now we can go into our variables that we created. We're going to get a reference to the task info header. We can type not equal exactly. We want to make sure that this is not equal to essentially nothing. We're going to do a make literal text, and it's going to be nothing. Off of this, off of the is valid, we want to do a not. We want to make sure that the sequence is not valid, so there is no sequence playing. Then we can, off of that, do an AND. Plug these two together. And then off of the return value of the visibility, we can do a select and have the Boolean plugged into the select. The false will be set to collapsed and true to visible. Then we can copy and paste the select node again. Now we're going to paste the return value from the first select node into the false pin of the second. And we need to do one more check. So we're going to do a get SF into action manager. And do a is in dialogue with NPC. So this is checking if the player is in any sort of dialogue with any NPC. If it is, we're going to set it to collapse. If it's not, we're going to use the previous select. Let's compile and save. Finally, we just need to do the next queue task text. So let's go to next queue task. Let's create a new binding. We're going to call this get next queue task text. This is pretty simple. We're just going to go down and find our upcoming task header text. We're going to not drag off of it. We're just going to search for an append string. Plug this into A. Or apologies, plug this into B. In A, we're going to do we're going to type upcoming with a space at the end, and then just plug this return value into the text return value to convert the string to a text. Let's hit compile and save again. Now back in our inventory manager, we can hit compile, and all these references should have corrected themselves, but to make sure, we can go up to file again and refresh all nodes. Same thing in the pop-up widget. Let's go to graph, refresh all nodes, save. Now that the core functionality of the tasks are set up, we now need to cover saving and loading tasks. So back into the content browser, if we open up the story framework folder, save game, we can open up the save game class. Inside here, drop down save variables, we want to add a new variable called player tasks. We're going to change this to a task info structure and make it an array. We need to add another new variable called player task timer. This will be used to keep track of the current task's timer. This will be a float, a single float, not an array. Let's compile and save. Now back into the save game folder, if we open up blueprints, components, and open up the save manager, we can go to the event graph and to the save variables to slot, then the save player data. Off of the end of all the previously saved variables, we need to add some functionality for saving our task information. So off of the save game reference that is above all of the set variables, we can drag off of this, create another reroute, and search for set player tasks. Then we can do a get SF inventory manager, and we're looking for task queue. Get task queue. Let's plug this into player tasks. Same thing again, off of the save game reference, a reroute, and we're going to do set task timer, set player task timer. And off of the inventory manager once again, we're going to search for get task timer, and connect this up. Then we can connect this up into the output once again. Then back to the event graph, we're going to set up the loading. Let's go load player data. Again, off of the end. We need to set up some custom functionality for this. So let's add a reroute off of the save game reference. We're going to do a get player tasks. Off of this, we're going to do a for each loop. Then we're going to connect the end execute pin to a sequence. Off of the then 0, we're going to connect up to the for each loop, and then 1 into the output, as we don't want the functionality to rely on loading the player tasks before it continues loading further information. So with this all connected, we can drag off of the for each loop and search for create, or rather we can search for get SF inventory manager and search for create and add task. You can connect the task info to the array element and the insert in QAdd index into the array index. And then off of completed, we need to set task timer. And we need to use the task timer, player task timer variable from the save game and plug it into the task timer. Now with this all connected, we can clean this up a little. So let's collapse this all to a collapse graph, and we'll call this load player tasks. Let's neaten this collapse graph up a little. For the save game ref. Let's make sure everything is lined up correctly here. Just neaten it up a little. Let's compile and save. Now, for the most part, that should be the entire process of setting up the new tasks. One more thing we can do is create a new input for showing and hiding tasks, in case the player doesn't want that extra clutter on their screen. So let's go to core, blueprints, example inputs, actions, gameplay, and let's create a new input here. So right click, input action. Let's call this toggle task. Then back into example input, we can go to the SF gameplay underscore IMC and add this to the input mapping. So let's add a new one. We'll call this toggle task. For this example, we'll use the key tab. Now to test this, let's go back to the story framework folder, core, example, character, blueprints, and the player controller. Let's set this up inside the inventory. We can search for toggle task, and then we can get the inventory manager, a reference to the inventory manager. Now let's quickly head back over into the inventory manager and set up a simple section for hiding or toggling the tasks. So let's right click and search for add custom event. We're going to do toggle task info. Off of this, we're simply going to get a reference to our task info pop-up ref. Check if it is valid. If it is valid, we are going to drag off of the pop-up ref once again and search for toggle task info bar. And we can simply collapse this into a graph. Let's call this toggle task pop-up. Now back in our player controller, we can search for toggle task info, and off of started, we can connect this up. So compile and save. So that should be the entire task system set up. Let's play around with a small example of this. So in the example map blueprint, I'm just going to add a delay node. Off of this, we can first search for a get SF inventory reference, and then add task. Create an add task. Let's make task info. call this test. Description will be, this is a test. Let's give it a timer of 30 seconds. Let's compile and save. Now we can test this out. Let's hit play. We see our task gets created. If we hit tab, it will toggle the visibility. Let's pause on 23 seconds and we hit save and quit. It all should load up correctly back onto 23 seconds.